What do Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and even Bernie Sanders have in common? They all want to escalate the war in the Middle East, even though it could lead to World War III. Hello there, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on our voyage to truth and freedom at a time when critical thinking, independent thinking, individual awakening would seem to be more important than ever, plus a willingness to look at ideas in a new way. This escalating conflict in the Middle East is perhaps the most sensitive of all the global sensitive issues that there are right now. It's very difficult to talk about Ukraine, Russia because of Ukrainian people, and the escalating situation in China. There are cultural issues that are very difficult to discuss now because we're so divided. But the mother of all issues is, of course, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, because it seems very difficult to say that Hamas's attack was wrong, Israel's response is brutal and devastating, and if we don't end this, it's going to get worse and worse. Obviously, that's simply obvious. And even saying both sides actually is something people don't like. Oh, one side's an army with nuclear war, the other one's potentially in an open prison. You know, this is very, very difficult to discuss. But where there is agreement is in the political class and in the financial sector, particularly the military-industrial Congress and people in Congress that own shares in weapons manufacturing companies. They all want this war to continue to escalate. Now, I know how divisive this is. I know there are some people that will settle for nothing less than support Israel, and other people who will settle for nothing less than support Palestine. How will we ever get to a point where we're able to, even at the level of conversation with people that are not involved, reach some sort of consensus if we're not willing to discuss peace? Peace, ceasefires, and de-escalation have literally been taken off the agenda by the political class and the legacy media class. I always say this when I talk about this subject. If you're personally involved because you are Israeli, or you're Jewish, or you're involved because you're Muslim, or you're involved because you have relatives in Palestine, or you're particularly affiliated to this issue for emotional, spiritual, religious, national reasons, then I would not try to dissuade you from your perspective. It would be ridiculous and actually rude, impolite, almost heretical. But for people that are not directly involved, I think we have to address that this is an escalating humanitarian crisis. It's likely to lead to a migration crisis if those documents prove to be true. I'm referring to the documentation that says it's part of an explicit plan to remove the entire population of Gaza. Even if you just look at this in terms of migration and put aside for a moment the ongoing slaughter and death that's currently taking place, we have a significant global issue to address. That's, again, without looking at the likelihood that this leads to a geopolitical crisis that's not going to be easy to walk away from if Iran get involved, if Russia get involved. It's extraordinary. So this is what I'm putting to you. Shouldn't we be able to talk about a ceasefire? I recognise if you're an Israeli person and you are affected by those horrific terrorist attacks, you're like, these are a different type of people, they have a different type of ideology. I recognise if you are connected to Palestine, these people have been oppressed ever since the establishment of the Israeli state. What's going on now? The bombing of a civilised population. Oh, well, if Hamas hide there, but what if Hamas were hiding in Israel? Like, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to even you find yourself, you're saying, God, all I want is to pray for love. All I want to pray, like, for the Muslim people to feel connected to Allah and peace, for the Jewish people to feel connected to God or Yahweh and to feel peace. That is somehow a controversial statement. If we're going to leave this here and all of us just sort of quietly back off into our own private corners of the internet with our own particular tiles, cancelling the people that we don't agree with, then I suppose what we have to accept is there's going to be a massive migrant crisis. There's going to be an escalation of the war in the Middle East. Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are going to make a good deal of money. Millions of people in Palestine are going to be displaced or killed. There will be further terrorism, probably not only in the Middle East, but probably across Europe and North America. That, I think, is the price of not discussing this. Obviously, I'm aware of my own personal limitations now more than ever, but my own recent experiences of not speaking out have told me that difficult conversations sometimes have to be had. So let's look at why is it that Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, John Fetterman will not discuss a ceasefire? Why is that? Why is it that the legacy media, the mainstream media, won't even put the word cease on the tickers on the bottom of their screen, let alone invite experts in peace? Why is it the marches and protests are so contentious? Do you think we're all being invited to pick a side, knowing that as long as we are divided, particularly those of us, as I keep reiterating, are not Israeli, not Palestinian, not Muslim, not Jewish, those of us that have just got caught up in the mad hysteria and are unwilling to step back, as long as that's happening, how is there going to be any progress at all? That's a genuine question. Let me know in the chat. Remember, we stream every day on Rumble. We've got got some incredible shows coming up for you. But now let's look at this incredibly complex, incredibly painful issue together. And let me reiterate once again, whatever side of this you're on, and I mean ideologically, not militarily, I offer you absolute sympathy, and I wish I could contribute in some meaningful way, even if it's just having a conversation on our channel. Let's get into it.
And in some cases, you can try to maintain your moral innocence, but that won't solve the problem.
Even a generalized principle like that is difficult, because if you were to actually approach this from a position of moral innocence, you would say war is bad, violence is bad, wherever possible, diplomatic solutions should be sought. That's exactly what I'd say if it was the Ukraine-Russia conflict that we were discussing. Here, particularly from a former president, there's an assumption, a baked-in assumption, that military action is necessary. Whether that's the droning campaigns that Obama backed, I think more than any other president, certainly more than his predecessor, George W. Bush. So Barack Obama is coming from a very particular perspective. One thing this story does highlight is you have total hegemony when it comes to the political class. This is one of the issues where people are not furiously debating this amount of time before you can have an abortion. No abortions at all. Yes, guns, no guns. Here it's war.
And so if you want to solve the problem, then you have to take in the whole truth. And you then have to admit nobody's hands are clean.
Well, your hands aren't clean. Like, there's an attempt by Barack Obama to sort of paint a picture where people that have literally sanctioned droning raids are the same as the rest of us that are like, well, actually, I'm pro-Israel, or I'm pro-Palestine. This is one area where the invitation for everybody that's outside of the establishment classes that literally benefit from war in so many ways, it galvanizes populations, it causes division, it generates profit, it's good for the media. Anyone outside of that should be going, hey, war's bad, isn't it?
That all of us are complicit to some degree.
That's kind of a spiritual perspective. Like, are you bringing to this conversation an attitude of peace and conciliation, or are you being incendiary? You could ask that, I suppose, of yourself. But when you're actually a president that's participated in treaties and bombing raids and assassinations and weddings being bombed, that's different. That has to be acknowledged. That has to be like, when I was president, I escalated this shit.
I look at this and I think back, what could I have done during my presidency to move this forward as hard as I tried? I've got the scars to prove it.
Well, some people haven't got the scars because they've been annihilated by bombing raids. This conflict has divided people. It's divided the right, it's divided the left, it's pulling people apart. And one of the only things that perhaps we could agree on is a peaceful solution as quickly as possible, an end to bombing. Like, these are the kind of things that certainly have to be discussed. To censor those ideas is terrifying.
But there's a part of me that's still saying, well, was there something else I could have done?
Well, yeah, there is actually. Maybe some bankers should have gone to jail for what happened in 2008, and the Yemen shouldn't have been so heavily droned. But let's put that aside and see what Hillary Clinton's got to say on the subject.
People who are calling for a ceasefire now do not understand Hamas. That is not possible.
Marshall McLuhan would say that the medium is the message. In this instance, the medium is Hillary Rodham Clinton. Hillary Clinton from the Clinton Foundation. Hillary Clinton that's never met a war that she didn't love. Obviously, no one's going to change their view of Hamas on the basis of information that's available about Hamas's intentions. But you might also want to look at the conduct and behavior of the United States government, particularly when Hillary Clinton's been in positions of power. A lot of people have died as a result of decisions she's participated in. And also, perhaps collectively, we want to make a decision. Whose side are we on? And that might not be as simple as Islam, Judaism, Christianity, secularism versus a religious perspective. It might start to become an elite establishment that benefit from perpetuating war versus everybody else who might be able to find some kind of solution where the imperialist, colonialist and economic imperatives to be removed. A lot of people are benefiting from this war. We'll get into that in a minute.
10,000 people in Gaza have been killed, half are children. The Pope's calling for a ceasefire. The UN has called for it. I'm just asking you. You're a good guy. I voted for you. I know you're a nice guy. This is important. You need to leave. Here, can I give you a phone?
That's enough of that.
I asked the senator a question.
Shame there's a rubber duck in the background and sort of quite gentle rock music.
I think we are sleepwalking our way into World War III. Sleepwalking our way into World War III with one foolish decision after another, as you outlined, David. And really, people should be deeply self-reflective if their predictions have not come true. they should consider whether perhaps their other predictions might not come true either. I mean, what is the track record here? It's not good.
He answers his own question. The track record, indeed, is not good. So, again, it's left to Elon Musk extraordinarily to be the voice of reason, as during the Ukraine-Russia conflict ongoing, it was up to him to not use Starlink to potentially exacerbate conditions by allowing it to be used by bombing raids, even though that was framed in some extraordinary ways by the dominant legacy media. Let's have a look now at how the legacy media are reporting on this. The likelihood of a global migration crisis of unprecedented levels, as well as the potential for World War III. And indeed, is there a way, with this complicated issue, with all of the complicated historic, religious issues involved, that there could be a peaceful and helpful conversation? Does anybody want to have that conversation? Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments. Since the October the 7th Hamas attacks and the subsequent ongoing Israeli airstrikes, US TV news has offered extensive coverage of Israel and Gaza, but as casualties mount, most outlets have paid scant attention to growing calls for ceasefire. After Hamas killed more than 1,400 people in Israel on October the 7th and took some 200 hostages, Israeli bombing killed over 5,000, now 10,000 people in Gaza as of October the 22nd, including more than 1,400 children. That's over 4,000 children now. They won't even know. The children won't know whether they're Muslim and Palestinian or Jewish children. The children on either side, if you left them and just said, listen, you guys are basically the same, they'd find a way through it. We're imposing historic violence needlessly. And if this is naive, then perhaps naivety might be one of the areas we should consider exploring, seeing how wisdom, rationale, and entrenchant tribal dispute might lead to World War III. Jewish-led protests in New York and other cities on October the 13th, and again in Washington, D.C. on October the 18th, made a ceasefire their central message. And a recent Data for Progress poll found that 66% of likely US voters agree that the US should call for a ceasefire and de-escalation of violence in Gaza. So why is it not being discussed if it's something that even voters in their run-up to an election are interested in? Jewish-led protests, at least, is some cause for optimism, I would say, because if people that are directly affected, religiously affected, feel like peace would be the answer, perhaps this is the kind of leadership we should be looking towards. Let me know in the chat. But the Biden administration has actively tried to suppress discussion of de-escalation. The Huffington Post reported on October the 13th that an internal State Department memo instructed staff not to use the words de-escalation or ceasefire, end to violence or bloodshed, or restoring calm in press materials on the Middle East. Do not mention restoring calm. What we gotta do is exacerbate tension and conflict. Well, that seems to be going quite well. Good. That's because no one ever mentioned ceasefire or de-escalation. We're doing our part in the press. Once again, the Biden administration are involved in censorship. If you disagree with censorship, then this is censorship. Remember, one of the things we continually talk about is having some principles, I suppose. That means values that don't alter on the basis that you would benefit from ignoring that principle. Otherwise, it's not a principle, it's a tactic. And here, the suppression of language like end to violence and restoring calm, like restoring calm, that's not something that should be said. Should we try and restore calm? Looking at broader cable news coverage, FAIR found that mentions of cease appeared in closed captioning on screen for an average of only 19.7 seconds per day on Fox, 11.1 seconds per day on CNN, and 9.2 seconds per day on MSNBC. Over the course of a whole day on MSNBC, only 9 seconds were devoted to the word cease, when there are wars everywhere. I mean, how many times did they say, take your vaccine? Well, the rest of it. As we continually discuss on our channel, the legacy media present and amplify narratives that are favourable to the agenda of the establishment. They did that during COVID. Take your vaccine, sit down, shut up, stay locked indoors. They did it with Ukraine, Russia. This is a necessary war. Putin's crazy. NATO did not provoke Putin, and it appears that that's happening again. Now, whether or not you are ideologically affected, I again say to you, I'm not trying to intervene with your emotional processes and your allegiance if they are heartfelt, familial, and religious. But what seems to be difficult to query is that the legacy media have taken a view here. Could that be because, as in other cases, it's connected to profit? Let's get into that. As tensions escalate between Israel and the Hamas group, it's been revealed US congressional leaders have been making some strategic investment moves into military-related stocks. Since the October 7 attack by Hamas on Israel, shares of Boeing Co., Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon Technologies have all increased in value, collectively adding roughly $23 billion in market capitalization. Why are we focusing on how many children have died when business is booming? Unusual Whales revealed a list of over 50 politicians who currently hold stock positions that directly benefit from war in the Middle East. 4 US politicians have profited from purchases they made in shares of defense companies just ahead of the Israel-Hamas conflict. Well, Elon talked about predictions. There's some predictions that paid off. So the legacy media have got a preferred narrative. The military-industrial complex have got a preferred outcome. What is likely to happen if this war continues to escalate? We've heard Elon Musk say World War III is a possibility. Let me know in the chat in the comments if you agree that that's a possibility. Also, though, there's the official information from the Israeli intelligence ministry that says that part of their intention is to clear the Gaza region. This seems like an extraordinary move. Let me know what you think about that in the chat. And however you look at it, it's going to cause an extraordinary migrant crisis. Now, a migrant crisis means that those people will be displaced, whether that's to Sinai or wherever, I don't know at this stage, but they're going to have to go somewhere. Now, even if your interests are nationalist, the increase of migrants, you know, in the US through the southern border, in the UK, from various ways across the channel and across European countries, a migrant crisis means people are going to have to go somewhere. Not to mention that many of these people might be bearing certain grievances as a result of the manner in which their migration was brought about. It's difficult not to regard them as refugees if indeed they are moved on as part of a deliberate and explicit edict. Let me know what you think in the chat. The Israeli Ministry of Intelligence is recommending the forcible and permanent transfer of the Gaza Strip's 2.2 million Palestinian residents to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, according to an official document. The 10-page document, dated October the 13th, 2023, bears the logo of the Intelligence Ministry, a small governmental body that produces policy research and shares its proposals with intelligence agencies, the army, and other ministries. It assesses 3 options regarding the future of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip in the framework of the current war and recommends a full population transfer as its preferred course of action. It also calls on Israel to enlist the international community in support of this endeavour. It seems like something, again, that ought be considered pretty carefully, and it also seems like an unprecedented and extraordinary move that's likely to lead to some negative consequences. The fact that an Israeli government ministry has prepared such a detailed proposal amid a large-scale military offensive on the Gaza Strip following Hamas's deadly assault and massacres in southern Israel communities on October the 7th reflects how the idea of forced population transfer is being raised to the level of official policy discussions. I can of course imagine that if you were affected by those horrific attacks, that any solution would seem plausible. Any solution. Destroy, destroy, destroy. I presume I would feel similar feelings if my children were murdered, God forbid. But isn't the role of diplomacy, isn't the role of media to openly discuss the possible outcomes and indeed the already abhorrent crisis that's taking place in Gaza as a result of the response? Isn't that the responsibility of people that aren't personally affected? I think a kind of a line has to be drawn, as one might draw around a grieving person in the instances of people from across the spectrum of this conflict who are temporarily so affected by the emotion, the deep emotion and trauma that perhaps they are unable to consider the various potential consequences of ongoing military and violent conflict. Fears of such plans, which would constitute a serious war crime under international law, it's worth considering, have grown in recent weeks, especially after the Israeli army ordered about 1 million Palestinians to evacuate the northern Gaza Strip ahead of escalating bombardment and incremental ground incursions. The document recommends that Israel act to evacuate the civilian population to Sinai during the war, establish tent cities and later more permanent cities in the northern Sinai that will absorb the expelled population and then create a sterile zone of several kilometres within Egypt and prevent the return of the population to activities, residences near the border with Israel. At the same time, governments around the world, led by the United States, must be mobilised to implement the move. The document unequivocally and explicitly recommends transferring Palestinian civilians from Gaza as the desired outcome of the war. Well, as the article says, that would constitute a war crime, and I suppose in any sensible mentality, all war and all violence is obviously already a crime, and I suppose we should be collectively looking at solutions beyond that. This is an article by Dennis Kucinich, who offers some alternative perspectives that indeed provide us with some optimism without being disrespectful to people that are directly affected by this conflict. War reduces all nothingness. It is as if 10,000 Palestinians and more had never existed, but they did, just as the 1,400 Israelis killed on October the 7th existed. They had birth dates, names, fragile exchanges of human emotion, of love, of family, private moments in everyday life that confirmed their existence. Obliterated. Nothingness. Whatever media we consume, we see only a fraction of the massive display of inhumanity occurring in Gaza, the reduction of living, breathing, thinking, feeling people to objects. This is heartless, this is soulless, this reduces all of existence to the nothingness of smoke, human smoke. The violence is calculated, it's rooted in power politics, in racism, in apartheid, in twisted history, opportunism disguised as vengeance, statecraft as slaughter. We in America are paying for the extermination of our fellow humans. Our weapons are creating carnage against helpless people. Our aircraft, our ships, our troops have entered the fray greatly outnumbered. But we are not helpless. We must demand now that our government takes a new direction, and soon, not only for ceasefire, but a ceasing of war, the end of arms sales to fuel war, the end of 800 military bases around the world, the end of the theft of our tax dollars for killing, the end of policies that pit people against each other, the end of the destructive psychology justifying violence to maintain strategic balance, the end of the false justifications for sending our troops into harm's way. If that perspective is one that you don't want to consider, then you're on the same side as Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, John Fetterman, etc. If we can recognize together that the American economy appears to require the perpetuation of global violence, if, as we've been saying on this channel with regard to other conflicts, there is a kind of unipolar globalist agenda within which the military-industrial complex and the American military conspire, then you have to consider the broader proposal here. Would it be beneficial to end this war? Would it be beneficial to not have institutionalized violence as part of an economic model? It is unfathomable beyond the Orwellian to commit ethnic cleansing and call it defense, to preach democratic values while practicing apartheid, to claim wholesale theft of property a right, to take Palestinians their homes, kill their children, destroy their family, their culture, their history, and deem it the fulfillment of a prophecy ordained by God. That this genocide is being visited upon the Palestinians by the descendants of those who suffered the utterly contemptible, indelible inhumanity of the Holocaust is incomprehensible. After all, who has suffered more than the Jews during the Holocaust? Entire families wiped out in a racist elimination plan. The awful killings of innocent Israelis on October the 7th and the wave of anti-Jewish sentiment that followed are a powerful reminder of the vulnerability of Jews everywhere. But the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank brings back greater risks for the survival of Israel itself and all those who dwell within. Do not assume that it is only the artifacts of the humble daily lives of Palestinians that lay buried in bomb craters. The America that could be, our own hopes and dreams for a prosperous and secure nation, lie alongside the bodies of the men, women and children in those ruins. Let us stand for the survival of both Jews and Arabs. Otherwise, we are all participants in the massacres that have been and those that are yet to come. The leaders of the world must assert common humanity and enact a cessation of this madness and create a new path, a new map, which is fair to all, and establish a new peaceful coexistence that recognizes the inner equality of all. We are called to take sides. Let us take the side of peace. Let us take the side of reconciliation. Let us take the side of restoration. Let us take the side of humanity. Let us all speak out against this descent into madness, into nothingness. And we Americans must demand that our government heal our own nation, serve our own people, and use our precious resources to improve the lives of all Americans. Once again, with respect to those of you that are unable, due to grief and the ongoing tragedy, to look at this with some clarity, I believe that we, the rest of us, have to seriously consider where we're heading as a people, what the likely outcome is. Is it a coincidence that the media will not discuss a ceasefire? Is it a coincidence that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin continue to profit? Is it wise to facilitate the criminal removal of millions of people from their homeland, and what are the likely consequences of that all around the world? I believe, unless those of us that are able to do not demand peace in a loving way, with due grace and understanding for the people that are directly involved, we are heading towards World War III. I don't know how long we as a species can precipitate this kind of violence, this kind of hatred, this kind of tribalism. But what I do know is the media benefit from it. George W. Bush thinks it's a good idea. Joe Biden thinks it's a good idea. Hillary Clinton thinks it's a good idea. Barack Obama thinks it's a good idea, because one way or another, they benefit from these conflicts. That's why the media can't speak to you openly about it. That's why the kind of division between us is stoked continually. That's why I believe that we have an individual and collective duty to find it within ourselves to awaken the resources that might lead to peace and change. If we are willing to be tribalized and encamped, then I do not see how we can proceed together. Then who will benefit? The establishment will benefit. The media will benefit. The people in Congress that own stocks and shares and invested more heavily in them on the eve of this war will benefit. But I don't see who else will benefit. Not if it indeed leads to World War III. And that is a serious consideration. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the chat and the comments? Whether or not you are open to changing your perspective. Whether you believe that peace should be an option for all of us. Whether you believe that collectively we share something that is greater than what divides us. Let us know all that and more in the comments. But more important than any of that, if you can, please stay free.